everyone, and welcome to another episode of Page Turners Plus. As always, we thank you for joining us and for keeping up with our novels that we read, particularly in Caribbean literature. Today, we'll be reflecting on Tobias Buckell's A Stranger in the Citadel. To tell you a bit more about the author and this novel, we have Kesua.
Tobias Buckell is a Grenada-born and Grenada and the Virgin Islands raised Caribbean author. Prolific experience, he currently resides in the US where he teaches creative writing. A Stranger in the Citadel is a pro-human, cool-headed argument for both literacy and critical thinking. When curiosity is a vice and obedience to the gods, machines at that time, the highest valor, it stands to reason that literacy is both a sin and a crime. Buckell's novel weaves a compelling tale with that premise. When she encounters a librarian and an archivist, and then discovers her father's deepest secret, Lilith's world falls apart. In this world where piety and good citizenship are one, where our world of art, science, and popular literacy is a thing of the past, cities are separated by swathes of wasteland and are each ruled according to their own city's sense of self. Despotism takes hold in some, egalitarian care in others. But all have sacrificed critical thinking for comfort. This is a sobering look at a not unlikely nor impossible future.
Thank you, Kesua. So I know we're going to have quite a spirited discussion today, but I suppose we could start with the basics of the novel. Is this a YA novel?
I'll jump in. I definitely felt that it was. I, the we don't know her exact age, but we know that Lilith is young, possibly a teenager, because she is still learning things about her family, like the father's secret. Um, and I feel that the writing for me was definitely what I would consider a YA novel. As I was reading it, in fact, I kept thinking that this is a book I should pass on to my son because I thought that he would enjoy it. Yeah, I think for me it's a YA novel. I have no idea whether it's classed as that, but that's how it read for me.
I didn't get that impression at all. I thought definitely it's got a young person as the central character, and in lots of ways it becomes something of a coming of age story. But it didn't feel like a YA novel. I felt I kind of disagree. I think the writing was actually quite clever. The plot was really simple on the surface in some ways, but actually there are a lot of twists and turns. There's a lot of depth as well. There's a lot of allegory, a lot of I don't know, just a lot. That made me think it was too complex for me. If I think about a YA novel in that same sort of genre, something like Children of Blood and Bone, I think that for me is a really classic YA piece. It's very, I don't want to say simple. That's not quite the word, but that for me definitely YA. But this, no, I don't think this is young adult fiction. I'm not saying it's not suitable for young adults, but I think for adults this is a very pleasurable novel to read. It doesn't feel like you're reading a young person's book for me.
Okay.
I agree with Kessoa. I think this novel is one of the rare novels that can be all things to all people. You can read it on the surface, and because it's an action novel, a very young reader who hasn't developed very sophisticated analytical skills yet will appreciate the action and the excitement. But this novel is also a novel of ideas. And there are things that will go over the heads of very young people who, as I said, have not developed sophisticated critical skills. I did not read it as a YA novel. I think it's a novel more appropriate for mature adults. But like I said, it can be all things to all people because you can just read the excitement. It reminded me of there's a novel by Anthony Winkler called God Carlos, where God is a mosquito. And it's hilarious because it's Anthony Winkler, so anything he writes is hilarious. And that is one of those novels that can be all things to all people. You can read it on the surface and it's funny because God is a mosquito. And, Anthony Winkler has, of course, comes from the whole Anansi tradition, so it's just hilarious. But he also makes very, very, very serious, criticisms of religion, which you can miss if you're not looking for it. So, and this novel, I think this novel is even more sophisticated than the Anthony Winkler novel. This is a highly sophisticated novel. I think it's more appropriate for people our age.
I can see why maybe the YA part is why y'all asking the question, because of the pace at which the novel moves, the action packed, the excitement and all that. But like Paula and Kessel, I think this novel has layers of complexity. I think it's deeply philosophical, to be honest. There's a lot that it causes you to question value systems, political systems, the wide gamut, right? It's cleverly written. I would say that it's actually, I'll even step out and say it's one of the best novels I've read in a long time, too. But then when you read a good novel, it's always the best novel you've read in a long time, right? Yeah, but I enjoyed it. I think Francine, yes, the fact that the protagonist was young, but I also liked that as it related to the way her thoughts were projected and how that naivety of hers started to mold itself into something deeper. And, and that's the path that the novel took you through. So yes, if I said to the Carrie, my son who's 14 years of age, grab this, read it, he will get the YA part. There's no two ways about it, right? And I, the father, who is also young, in spirit, I'll get the YA part too, but I will also get the deep philosophy. So that's my view.
Yeah, it's not inaccessible to younger readers, I think is probably what I would say, but it's complex enough to kind of keep the interest of older intellectual types, because it is an idea of novels. I think Paula said it right.
Right, and I definitely agree with that, but I do feel like I need to say that I think you guys are underestimating our young readers. I've read other YA novels that are quite complex and address very important themes, so I'm sticking to my.
I'm not underestimating young readers, because I will tell you why I don't think I'm underestimating young readers. A lot of this novel went over my head on my first reading. No, I am not saying I am the most sophisticated reader, but I ain't done. And I didn't understand a lot of the novel, or I didn't process a lot of what was happening until my second reading. I mean, Tobias Buckell is a writer's writer. He uses all the classical literary devices. There's a lot of cultural allusion, biblical allusion, classical allusion. And I missed a lot of the cultural allusion on my first reading. I certainly missed some of the classical allusion and even some of the literary allusion on my first reading. So I think, like I said, this is a sophisticated novel. And I think for you to appreciate it fully, you need to have a certain level of maturity.
And you also have to be quite aware of current events as well. I mean, I don't think he's quite explicit in relating the book to a lot of what we know, what we'll discuss later. But with a certain knowledge that you have, a certain political and social knowledge that you have, you see the little nuggets that are dropped throughout the novel. And as you mentioned, Paul, it takes a second read to pick up a lot of the things that he drops. I mean, even, maybe this is embarrassing for me, but even the concept of Vittel, I didn't get it at first. And then later on, and I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense.
If you were Jamaican, it would have been no problem, because food, bickle means food. And Bickle is Vittle in the English version is Vittle. So if you were Jamaican, you wouldn't have had any trouble.
Yeah, but I mean, I could see
what do you mean by
why,
that? When you said you didn't get it, like what didn't you get?
because I think later on in the novel, Ishmael referred to it as basics or something of that sort. I think that was the exact term. He called it
Basic,
basic.
or basic.
Yeah. And whereas the people this from the Citadel, they thought that this was the greatest thing ever. So the comparison that I got there was that the thing that you're provided with and you think that that's the end all to life, you could think that there's nothing greater in the world. Whereas Ishmael, who had much more knowledge, and hope I'm not revealing too much, saw past that and just saw it as something basic. That's how I read it. And you wouldn't pick that up until later on in the novel when he mentions that. So that's how I saw it. So we could continue on by speaking a bit more about the novel. So, how well does the novel address the debate surrounding the relative value of scribal and oral traditions as ways of retaining knowledge? And this is something that we speak about quite often at Page Turners Plus. Guess where you're smiling away.
I'll jump in because again, I think the novel did it wonderfully. I think that theme was woven throughout the novel quite well. It was basically the central theme of the novel, and we saw arguments for and against both of these traditions, both scribal and oral. And I think at the end, well, not to give a spoiler away, I think that the argument continues. Like the book didn't like resolve it one way or the other. I think it left it open to the reader's interpretation as to, well, what the relative value of each of those traditions.
Didn't you think, though, that it was skewed towards favoring the scribal tradition? That's how
It definitely
I
was.
read it.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely was when you think about the conclusion. It yeah, I would say it was skewed, but I do think that he didn't hesitate to show the value of the oral traditions, which, was basically not that was what allowed the society to continue in a way. The oral traditions, they used those oral traditions to be able to build back up the scribal tradition. So, you know,
I think the skewing Paul is talking about, which is evident, yes, towards the written tradition. The skewing for me was making a point that if you have access to what's written, you have access to knowledge, as it were. Whereas if you are just fed the oral stuff, then you know what you're told. Okay. And I think that was a sort of, I sort of got that theme, if you want, as a point that was being made. And this is why access for some people was denied so that they could be controlled. That's where I projected that sort of thinking.
I think the novel was careful to show that the scribal tradition is not the only way of preserving knowledge. For example, Lilith makes Lilith points out, she gloats when Ishmael is wrong about something, and the oral traditions that she had been taught was the correct had the correct answer to the question he was asking, and he had to admit that. And then Lilith also, there is a short afterward essay where Tobias Buckell speaks about his teachers basically correcting his misapprehension that the oral tradition was necessarily faulty. And he talks about the corrective measures that exist within the oral tradition to make sure that the history is correct. And Lilith refers to it when she and Ishmael have a disagreement about the relative value of each tradition. I think this novel has to be skewed in favor of the scribal tradition because reading is forbidden, and that is the central problem of the novel. So it had to be skewed in favor of the scribal tradition. But I think too, I think it's hard for us, because we were raised in a scribal tradition, to not think that the scribal tradition, to disabuse ourselves of the idea that the scribal tradition is not a better tradition, because it's what we've been taught all our lives. And we are now at a point where we're rethinking that and wondering whether what we've been taught all our lives is in fact correct, because so much of what we're taught is because our education system is colonial and favors everything that belonged to the colonizer.
I was smiling at the beginning when you first asked the question, because I do think it's something of a false dichotomy. And I think the novel alludes to that, right? This idea that actually either one is exclusively useful. Ishmael gets things wrong, but he also begins to doubt things that are true, in fact, because of the power of the oral tradition and because the only tradition he can rely on, this particular piece of knowledge, is in the written form, right? So I do think he kind of plays with it a little bit, but sets it up in a way that I think is possibly a little bit unhelpful. The Egyptians invented writing, like it's as old as time. So I disagree with myself. I'm not sure what question I'm answering here. Yeah. But I did want to say that I think the larger point almost that he makes about intellectual traditions more broadly is that if thought takes place outside of a full context, if it doesn't take place in a context of freedom to think fully, if you like, then it's always going to have, whether it's written or oral, orally transmitted, it's always going to be used to control people and to make the world smaller for people. And he does that quite cleverly with the novel in very literal senses. The world is literally a smaller place for them because they have the city, but there's no sense of a nation, there's no sense of a country, there's no sense of a region in the way that we understand the world, right? And there's no sense actually of the wider world as being part of a world, right? There's just the city that you come from and then outside. Yeah, that was my point.
And I like the way that point was made when Ishmael was discussing with the concept of the wall, right? The wall is there to not keep people out, but to keep you in. I can't remember which way it was.
He asked the question
balanced.
like, why do you have walls? Like, you don't go anywhere. Like, what's this for? Like, what's
and you've not been invaded for generations,
invaded, right?
Yeah.
But you know why I found that also funny in a sense that and I'm bringing it to the modern context where as people amass wealth and they build bigger homes, the walls get higher, and I just thought, yeah, I see that around me.
And it is a concern. That is a concern of the novel. Greed is a major concern of the novel. Inequality of distribution of resources is a major concern of the novel. So yeah, it's not accidental. It's not accidental, Tony, that you thought of that. The novel is meant to make you think about that.
I agree. Totally agree.
And I want to be a bit controversial here now. Does this novel quarrel with religion? I didn't see it directly, but I saw more a quarrel with belief systems and how firmly people hold on to their belief systems regardless of the information before them. maybe religion falls within that, but I didn't see a direct quarrel with religion, but a quarrel with belief systems in general.
I think it is a core of religion more so than belief systems. I was agreeing with you up until that. But if we think about how Kira very quickly adapts her way of understanding her place in the world that she lives in, that we meet at the beginning of the novel, then actually she's very quick and almost prepared, if you like, to dash a belief system away that we had been, or Lilith, and that we see through Liv's eyes, had been taught to think is the only way, right? And she doesn't necessarily have a grand plan as how, like Paula was saying about the resources can be distributed differently. We don't see that come into play. What we understand is that she's willing to sacrifice leaders, or even a kind of societal structure, if you like, for beliefs. So I do think it is a quarrel with religion because she has a kind of fervent belief that is almost religious, if you like, in the way things are. And that drives her all the way to the last time we meet her, right? The last time we see Kira, she's still very much based on that. So I do think it is about religion more than belief systems per se, because I think she doesn't change her belief system to. I think I disagreed with myself just there, didn't I?
Maybe this is a going off track a bit, but guess what? You're the historian here today. Didn't you just get glimpses of the collapse of the Grenada Revolution in the way the story was told? I'm just putting it out there in terms of the belief systems and how people who were part of the revolution, for 4 years they behaved as though this was what they wanted, and at the slightest opportunity they collapsed the revolution and then assassinated the prime minister.
No,
I don't think that is just.
I think that's just the fall of any empire.
That's the point. I don't think that's just the Grenada Revolution. I think that's empires crumbling. That's just symptomatic of what happens.
What it looks like at the end. But also, I think from my historian perspective, I would say that the way that religion is used in the novel, and the way that they can't really cope when they find out their beliefs are flawed, right? So I think we as humans understand what the archangel represents, right? But they don't. And the way that Kira is kind of broken by that experience with it, I don't know, this isn't my historian's hat now, I'm just talking about the novel. But I do think it's really interesting. There's a lot of I'm just chatting nonsense today. Excuse me, readers.
No, Keswa, you said something that fascinates me. You said that we understand what the archangel represents. Well, maybe I just too dunce because I wasn't too sure. So perhaps you could tell me what you understand the archangel representing.
I don't know if I can without giving spoilers to our viewers. But the whole my what I will say is, if you remember the form that the archangel takes when they describe how it walks, but it's got the power to escape fire. This is
it's a god machine, so it's a machine created by the gods. Mm-hmm.
But it's like a fallen angel.
It's not a fallen angel. It's doing the work of the gods. It's an enforcer. It's an enforcer.
It's an enforcer. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's made of powerful metal, so it's essentially just a robot. It's just a robot. It's a very clever. And it's not even that clever.
It's not even a robot, because it goes back to the gods to regenerate. So I don't know that it's kind of like a cyborg kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what I mean. But it's just a clever robot, like, and one of the things the archangel says is, why can't you follow rules? Why can't you just obey? Because and that's what I mean. We said we understand that this just is a world created by computers who don't understand humans fundamentally, but have control over them. The cornucopia is Alexa on speed, right? It's going to give you whatever you want, whatever you need, to the point of fulfilling your material needs. But because they're computers, and it's just AI gone wild, right? It's the future that Elon Musk wants to take us into, right? It's that you can ask whatever you want and you get whatever you want, but it can't ever
isn't that so? This is going back on the religious theme, though, because isn't that what the Bible says? Believe and you shall receive. That sort of concept. Why just doesn't just follow these rules and you will be okay?
I disagree. Yeah. I think But
Kesawa, think about the Genesis story, right? Because the Genesis story, this novel is confronting the Genesis story. The Genesis story says, do not eat of the tree of from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And Eve, when the serpent tempts Eve, one of Eve's motives for eating the fruit is that she saw that she could get wisdom from eating the fruit. Now, I have a quarrel with Genesis because I don't know why I should trust anything that doesn't want me to know things. I don't know why ignorance, comfort is ignorance is the price of comfort. I have all kinds of problems with Genesis, and I think the novel does as well. What's interesting though is that the novel doesn't seem to have a problem with the idea that having to work for a living is burdensome. Because the novel doesn't ever say the cornucopia is there's something wrong with the cornucopia just producing food, well, all your needs, and all you need to do is be obedient for this to happen. So I wonder how much of a quarrel. It's not that deep of a quarrel with Genesis, is it? If you're okay with the Garden of Eden existing and you don't have to work for a living, how deep of a quarrel with Genesis is this novel?
I think we're all disagreeing with ourselves today. That's the power of this novel. We don't know what we think by the end of our own sentences. I will say Genesis. I don't think it is. I think there's a key part of Genesis story that you're talking about, right? The fall, which is that what Eve loses is a relationship with God, right? That's what's sacrificed. They're cast out of the garden. They're cast out of the closeness with God, and that's never offered in this novel, right? The gods are far away, unknown, mystical creatures. So it's the opposite in some ways, right? Because the bounty is there, but the relationship isn't. So it's the opposite, I think, of what's going on in the fall.
The thing is that the gods in the novel are not the Abrahamic gods. Are not the Abrahamic God. So they're different gods.
They do demand full obedience in the way that we think of that, though. So they're not a world apart. I do think they're intended to be all-seeing, and they're also perceived as kind of all-seeing, all-knowing. They're feared in the way that we classically understand an Abrahamic God to be fearful and to be feared. So I don't think they're not actually designed in that way. And the archangel who comes down and delivers messages and other things, I think is very reminiscent of the biblical God that we know. Or the representation of it, right? Like the way that those kind of symbols are there. But I think that fact that the gods are so far away, right? And I think that's a real difference, and I think that's where I think you're right when you say Tobias Buckell doesn't have a problem with people but then is it living off the land, taking things that they don't have to work for? But is it the idea that actually we're provided with resources in abundance? What we don't do is share them.
That is what the novel. That is one of the conclusions of the novel. But I don't want to spend too much time on the religion question, even though it was a big part of the novel. But why I said the gods are not the Abrahamic God, like the Abrahamic God, is that these gods are the Adirons. Certainly, they want the Adirons in the city. What was the name of it again? The city they went to where Priscilla was the governor or the ruler.
The DC place.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it right now. It will come to me. But you remember Slamming Joe said, the gods are capricious. So even though we honor them, we have to bear in mind that they are not infallible. For example, Washington, which is one of the wonderful Easter eggs in the novel. Washington gave us honesty and gave us democracy, but he enslaved people. And we have to remember this, not to go overboard in venerating him. So that's why I don't think it's an Abrahamic God, because the gods are fallible and the adherents know that the gods are fallible.
I'm enjoying this discussion because what's clearly coming out is what we said in the beginning, the complex layers of this novel. And as you mentioned, the cornucopia, that's another scent of the novel altogether. At one time, I was saying the cornucopia in modern times is like the economy. It's provided once you follow certain, rules, guidelines. It's there. It's a god machine, I know, right? But also, the peasantry and everybody seemingly has access to it. But in the Citadel, there is a hierarchy, and it's what's happened in government systems, right? And so Vittel might very well be the crumbs that falls off the table of, so there's so many things weaving there. But I wanted to not belabor the issue with religion, but I wanted to know from Kesua, was there some sort of underlying metaphor with the archangel pursuing Ishmael? What then was, because if the archangel, as you say, is a God manifestation coming to earth, what then was the metaphor behind the archangel pursuing Ishmael? Or am I just taking things a little too deep?
At this stage, I'm gonna say, can I point out, I read the same novel as you guys, right? And I only read it once. Number one, I have not read any theses on this novel. Yeah, but I think, it's a good question. What's the metaphor? I don't know. I do think it from the archangel we discover the gods, if you like, because they're the only person that has real access to the gods. The people that we meet, the other characters have just kind of what they've been told about the gods, but we know that the archangel comes from them. So from how they are and what they do, we know more about the gods themselves. Is probably what I would say, and that's why I think we know that the gods are actually just, it's just the Matrix, isn't it? Like it's just AI having taken control. The thing that this book made me want to do is go and rewatch the Avengers: Age of Ultron, because the way that the archangel talks about humans was really reminiscent of like that whole storyline about how when machines take over, why humans have to get rid of, because they're actually the most destructive force on Earth. Like Earth would be fine if there were no humans. All right. And so I don't have any more on that in terms of what's the metaphor, but I do think it's just a sign that the gods are actually just extremely sophisticated AI and who've managed to kind of take control of the Earth.
I have something that you'll probably have more on. Is this a feminist novel?
To be asked of every novel we read. I'm gonna let someone else take this because I'm not the only feminist on the panel.
I put that question there for you though, Kesua.
But maybe the quintessential West Indian man should answer it then.
But in a word, yes, this is a feminist novel. All the women, well, there were lots of women in positions of power. All the women were rounded characters. They were fully fleshed characters. It was there was no sense of the world being skewed in favor of men, because, for example, within the Citadel, Lilith could have been the Lord Musketeer, just as one of her brothers could have succeeded their father. So yeah, this is definitely a feminist novel.
And when we go to the other city, we see a city which is ruled by a woman, even in the most egalitarian form. The one person that's the most like a leader, shall we say, because they seem to have a very horizontal leadership structure, is a woman. So that suggests that actually, when things are all completely, and we know that the Citadel is a corrupted form of governance or government. So we can assume that, I think if Tobias Buckell was called Tabitha Buckell, it'd be easier to say, yep, this is a feminist novel. This is amazing. But so this is
So
like
wait, men can't be feminists? What is that?
It would have been easier. I didn't say it wasn't a feminist novel. I said it'd be a quicker yes answer from me. But I think with all the things that you've said, I think we can say that women feel present and important in this space, and I'm happy to declare it a feminist novel.
Thank you.
But guess what? Doesn't it have all the makings of what you would call a feminist novel? Yeah. So that's the end of the point.
If the author was a woman, it would have been easier. It would have been a quicker yes. But I had to really think about it. Can a man write a feminist novel? I'm like, I guess so. Maybe I need to rethink my own
Yes.
definition of feminism.
Didn't we discuss this when we did the Marlon James book? I think we all agreed it was feminist novel, no?
No,
No,
I didn't agree. No, I
Oh.
did not at all agree that it was a feminist novel.
We did discuss that though, right? We did have a discussion about that when we read that
Spider
book,
Witch.
if I'm not mistaken. The Moon Witch Spider
Moon
King.
Witch Spider King.
Yeah.
Because it was.
Yes, but let's get back
Yeah,
to this novel.
Yes, right.
I mean, and following on from the feminist question, is Kira a monster? Kessler is shaking her head.
No, I was agreeing. It was a great question. I don't think she's a monster. I think she's a fascinating character. But I've also talked a lot, so I'm happy to let anyone else take this one.
I actually liked Kira. I didn't think she was a monster. She was doing what she saw as right, and what she saw as right is how she was indoctrinated, which again is what happens in life. I mean, people pursue their own truths, what they think is the truth, right? And that generally is the cause of conflict. It's what's causing conflict in the world today. Who has the truth, you know? And so I didn't see Kira as any monstrous person. I saw a lot of nice, soft human traits about her. I saw areas where she seemingly making compromises, and you know, although I kept looking at those compromises in a very suspicious way. But we live a life of compromises. So I saw a lot of soft, fluffy parts of Kira. Being the battle axe that she was, you know, there was still that warmth that I got from her. So no, Roger, I didn't see her as a monster.
She's a zealot, and she shows us where zealotry leads you to, because we realize that very early on in the novel, she's very comfortable with absolute cruelty, and she's very comfortable with murder, right? And so I'm only saying this for the sake of readers who are like, oh, Kira sounds like a great character. Why we call her a monster? She lets people die for no good reason. You know,
well,
so
but not what her reasoning is
she
a good reason.
Integrity, but she's a picture of like the you talked about a life of compromise. With her, there's no compromising. Not and the only time there's a compromise is when there's a strategic alliance being made, and we see that with Lilith, right? And that's
right. So within the Citadel, there was no compromise, but you saw when they were surviving.
When they're surviving together in the desert.
Right, that's what I meant. You know,
that's what I mean. But
that's because it was absolutely necessary.
Right. It was strategic. It was strategic. It was she literally had no choice. She had to make those compromises. Otherwise, you know, she and her people would have perished basically. So.
And when we thought that Kira was softening, she did something that just broke my heart. Now, I don't want to reveal what she did, but I thought it was, I at this time I'm thinking, all right, Kira is letting love guide her. And it turns out that Miss Kira was still committed to her convictions. And she would have sublimated love to those convictions.
So she's doing,
and that was heartbreaking for me.
She was doing what a snake knows to do, bite. You know.
Well, she wasn't. I don't think she was. I think she's. I call her a zealot deliberately because I think she's got real integrity. There's no two ways about it. If you would follow her, if you were one of her soldiers, you'd follow her to the death because you know she's got your back. You know, she cares deeply about the people who follow her, and she has a real sense of like right and wrong that is truthful. Although that becomes more apparent at the end. At the beginning, it feels like she's much more willing to compromise when she talks about the siblings and their habits. You know, what did you see? You know, she's willing to accept foibles or inconsistencies with the people that are in power, right? So she's not a total she's not perfect, should we say, right? And like I said, I think her penchant for cruelty, like we see it early on, because I think it's supposed to remind us as she becomes more compassionate in the novel. It's easy to forget that early cruelty that we don't get to see because she's so compassionate later. But as Paula said,
But it wasn't true compassion, though.
She's compassionate with her stuff, with her colleagues, right? With her soldiers, that she cares for them deeply. She knows them by name, but she also knows how to point out that she and that's different from the way that Lilith is. Lilith has to learn their names, right?
But isn't this because she comes from the same background as her soldiers? She comes from the commons, just like her soldiers. Lilith was born to privilege. So Lilith never had to acknowledge the humanity of the Guardians. They were just there to serve her. And remember, Lilith grew up, she's a child of a ruler, could become the ruler herself. And in the Citadel, her everybody is just there to serve her. So there's nothing to persuade her that it is necessary to know who each guardian is, to treat each guardian as a human being. They're there to serve her, and nothing in her experience taught her differently.
And who was her teacher? Not Kira. Surely if Kira was fully aware of the humanity of those guardians, it was well within Kira's power to teach that to Lilith. So that she chose not to suggests that she was willing, if you like, to live according to the rules of the space, even if they didn't personally suit her, right? And I think that's why I say she's a zealot in some ways. But I don't think she's unflawed. Oh my God, my English today. But she's not without failing, I think.
So this will be our final question. Did you notice any biblical, literary, or cultural references in the novel? Well, I definitely got the biblical reference. Exodus 22:18, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not suffer, which is to suffer. And in this, he said, you shall not suffer librarians to live. I think I said that wrong, but you get the point. That was one reference that I got. And I ended up going down a rabbit hole of like those religious blog posts on the internet explaining Exodus 22:18, thou shalt not suffer witches to live.
There were so many biblical allusions. Ishmael is the outcast, just like the biblical Ishmael. Lilith is not strictly a biblical character, but it's a character known within the Jewish tradition. There were just lots of biblical allusions, lots of cultural allusions. The god of music is very disappointingly Elvis. Elvis Presley. I mean, come on, Tobias Buckell. Elvis Presley is god of music. Please spare us. And Priscilla, I wasn't sure whether Priscilla was meant to be Priscilla Presley. Then Washington is George Washington. There were lots of allusions to Langston Hughes, to Harlan, that poem by Langston Hughes, poems by Edgar Allan Poe. Of course, the Three Musketeers, Alexandre Dumas, and also the other Dumas, another Dumas novel. Which one? The Count of Monte Cristo.
Count of Monte Cristo.
It was exciting. There were so many Easter eggs. It was so much fun. Good job, Tobias Buckell, except for Elvis Presley.
All right, so we actually have time for one more question. So I want to throw out to the panel: were there any characters you knew well?
I thought I knew all of the characters well. I knew Kira. I knew several Kiras. I knew Lilith. Young, innocent, impressionable. I knew the Lord Musketeer. I knew Lilith's siblings, Kemi. I certainly knew Kemi. These characters just felt familiar to me.
And just to take you back to something you said earlier, Paula, in terms of the sophisticated reader would have so many interpretations and there's so many layers to this novel. And I mentioned earlier that I just thought of the Grenada Revolution. Perhaps it's because of where Tobias Buckell was born, but I don't want to make it sound bad, but I could relate the characters to people who have read or took part in the revolution, and the way Lord Musketeer fell. Maybe I shouldn't say that. The way things happened within the Citadel, I just saw the Grenada Revolution and its implosion.
Until you mentioned it, I hadn't thought of the Grenada Revolution, but it makes perfect sense. I completely see where you're coming from.
I felt I knew the stranger, and because I know many disruptors, and I felt as if he was disruptor in chief, and I can think of many characters, many people that I know that are Ishmaels. So that, and is it the character I like the most? Maybe competing with Kira. Ishmael and Kira were the two characters that grabbed me.
I really liked Ishmael as well as a character. It was interesting that whereas we know how young Lilith is, we have no sense of how old Ishmael is. He is older. Is he 15 years older or 40 years older? I wasn't 100% sure when I read it. I think he's also the character that I feel is most familiar. Somebody with such a passion for the written word, with the power of I think he represents that part of the novel that really fights for critical thinking, for literacy. And I know a lot of people that are very similarly, passionate about education and its liberatory qualities. In particular, I want to pick up what you said, Roger, about the Grenada Revolution. I am unsure about that connection. I think if you want to say that the fall of Liz's family is like the fall of Gary, then it makes more sense to me than if it's the end of the revolution that you're comparing it to. Just because of the corruption of the Lord Musketeer that we discover, and the way that the family is cared for and protected, and the masses are cut off.
Don't you see similarities between Kira and Bernard Cord?
Yeah, Cord, definitely.
Yes.
So
yes.
So and now that Roger brought that,
then it makes sense. If the Lord Musketeer is Eric Gary, then that makes sense. I thought you're painting the Lord Musketeer as Maurice Bishop, in which case I was like, this seems a bit blasphemous. So yeah, it depends on how you're characterizing who. We can ask Buckell though. I'd love to ask him that question. I think it's a good one.
And on that note, I think it's a good way to end, because the next time you see and hear from us, we'll be interviewing Tobias Buckell on this novel. So we invite you to join us for that particular episode and for all our other episodes, which you can catch on our YouTube page, Page Turners Plus, as well as our Facebook page, Page Turners Plus. Thank you for joining us and have a lovely day.